I'll begin with the overall theme that both books demonstrated that American education has been challenged by a society that has changed tremendously over the years, while our educational system seems to be at a standstill. For instance, in the first book, Leading Schools in Disruptive Times, How to Survive Hyperchange, the authors Carter and White examine how education is being challenged by an array of disruptions that include social media, maintaining school safety, to promoting school diversity. As educational leaders, we must recognize what is happening and adapt to these changes and use the disruptions to our advantage. Take, for instance, a student we had at our school a few years ago who was openly transgender. She questioned our school restroom policy, and no one did anything to confront the issue. This leads me into chapter 2, where the authors introduce the CAT strategy, coping, adjusting, and transforming. A strategy that could have been used with that particular student, or perhaps when any sudden disruptive event occurs. I personally feel if the model would have been in place at our school, we could have helped that student adjust to her situation as well as other students. In the book, Saber-Tooth Curriculum, we are introduced to two men, the teacher and the student, on the evolution of education through a series of lectures. In chapter 2, we are introduced to the first lecture, the three fundamentals, learning to survive, shelter, and safety. Sounds familiar? In other words, the basis of education are still with us today, math, science, history, but they need adjusting. In chapter 3, the lecture continues on how the tribe has failed to change as the needs of the tribe have changed. This was an aha moment for me, since history has demonstrated that we need to change with the times. Thus, the question arises, is education teaching our students what they truly need to know in order to be successful in the 21st century, or are we still teaching the basics on how to survive? In chapter 4, we're introduced to all the constraints associated with educational reform. A quote that stood out in this chapter was, "You are teaching them how to think," which clearly makes sense. Back then and even today, we need to teach our students how to think for themselves and become problem solvers. After reading the chapters in these books, I realized that we're all educational leaders in disruptive times, and we need to learn to cope, adjust, and reflect on our school system in order to help serve our students better.